Good afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be. Arizona, Northern Arizona, Midwest, East Coast, West Coast. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very special broadcast being brought to you by the Lived Black Experience Project, which is a special from the Southside Community Association and the Murdoch Community Center right here in Flagstaff, Arizona. We thank you for joining us today for this special conversation on the talk and DWB. And if you're not a part of the Black community, or even if you are, this might be something new to you, but to most in the Black community, the talk, it's not about the talk that we sit down with our sons, even our daughters, but today this is about our Black males. This isn't the talk about intimacy, relationships. The talk in the Black community is code for that conversation, which is a hard conversation that you have to sit down, particularly with our Black sons, to talk to them about how to perhaps keep themselves safe, or not to be a target for police officers. And when we say DWB, the acronym for not a new car, but for driving while Black. And so we sit down with our sons and we have this conversation on what to do in the event that you are stopped by a police officer while driving. Very happy to have all of our guests and our resident facilitator, Sister Kara House, is going to get our conversation started. Sister House.
Thank you very much and welcome everyone today. We're going to start our conversation with a candid conversation with members of Phi Beta Sigma about the talk. And that conversation will go for about 30 minutes. And we're going to start today with Mr. Adrian Hunt. Mr. Hunt has had 14 years of continued service within the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. He has worked a variety of sections throughout the department and is currently assigned to Patrol Division, Convention Center Area Command. He is an LVMPD Defensive Tactic Instructor and Course Development Instructor, and served as the Vice President of the Nevada Black Police Association for approximately 4 years. He has served as a mentor and advisor to the LVMPD Explorers Post of Young Minorities and received the LVMPD Officer of the Year Community Service Award in 2015 and 2016.
Thanks for having me, guys. Thank you.
We're also going to be hearing from Mr. Warren Brown. Mr. Warren Jerome Brown, the youngest of 3 children, was born in South Central Los Angeles, California, and grew up in a neighborhood where gangs, shootings, drugs, and the death of peers were all too common. Mr. Brown found his escape through photography, community involvement, and education. Mr. Brown has served in numerous occupational roles, including the site director for the New Turf Gang Prevention Program, the founder of the Warren J. Brown Foundation for Youth, a national youth consultant, a middle and high school educator, a licensed residential and commercial building contractor, a regional senior living maintenance manager, a hotel chief engineer, and is an accomplished public speaker. Currently, Mr. Brown serves as the Arizona State Director for Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated and is a certified unified communications expert and an information technology consultant with the Hybrid Nerd. Welcome, Mr. Brown. We will, of course, we will also be hearing from Mr. Edward Lumpkin.
Sister House, I'm sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know that Mr. Melvin Hall is in the studio.
Fantastic. So Mr. Edward B. Lumpkin received his undergraduate degree in finance from Prairie View A&M University and an MBA from the University of Phoenix. Presently, he is employed with American Express as a credit manager while also serving as an adjunct professor with Phoenix College. He has held leadership positions with several community-based and business organizations, including the Levine Lions Club, South Mountain YMCA, Advocates for the Disabled, and Wells Fargo Diversity Council, and Team Member Resource Group. He is father to two beautiful children, ages 17 and 20, and is an active member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, where he serves as first vice president for the Phoenix chapter. Welcome, Mr. Lumpkin.
Glad to be here.
And finally, we will also be hearing from Mr. Melvin Hall. Mr. Hall is many things, including a husband of 16 years to Nicole Aljanay, a father to 24-year-old Bailey Aljanay, and the current chapter president of the Phoenix chapter of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. Mr. Hall received an BA in English with a minor in radio television broadcasting from Elizabeth City State University and is currently working on his MBA. Welcome, Mr. Hall.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get right into it. We're just going to have you guys share your stories, your experience with hearing the talk, giving the talk. What does that mean to each of you, and what has that looked like in your lives?
I guess go ahead and choose whichever one. Why don't we start with Brother Hunt?
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and start with you, Mr. Hunt. You're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Right.
Yes.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it. I'm always down, to get a chance to share my side and my experience, regarding what's going on, especially being an officer, a black officer at that, because we have faced some perplex situations, being in the middle, which sometimes can be difficult. I have two boys. I have a 12-year-old and a 2-year-old. So it's definitely, been a challenging with them as well, as far as especially my 12-year-old, just, getting him to understand what's going on, seeing everything outside of what's going on as well, as far as, Instagram, whether it's YouTube. So that can be challenging. I also mentor as well. I mentor youth through our fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma, the Sigma Beta Club. So it's always been a challenge as well with them, just trying to get them to understand what's going on. So we put on pretty much forums almost every quarter about what to do when stopped by the police. So throughout this, guys, if you guys have any questions, if any advice I can give, I can definitely help in that aspect. But the thing, the main pivotal thing that we try to get, to teach these kids, essentially to comply. I think a lot of times a lot of people take that the wrong way. Of course, as an officer, you know what I mean? Anywhere you go, a law-abiding officer, you are required to show ID and to pretty much represent, to pretty much show, we have to identify you essentially when asked. So in a lot of times we just try to give them the guidelines and the basics of what to do. The issue we have, I would say in our culture, in our community, we want to have justice on the corner. We want to have court there. We want to have, no, it's not the time and place. Or always say we need to hit them in the pockets. You know what I mean? So whether we take it back and we give the steps and protocol to file a report, how to get that officer's badge number, how to try to pull up that call in the area command, which we as public servants, we have access to. As far as the public and citizens, we have access to, and they hit it where it counts and start a paper trail. I know you guys notice a lot of these officers that have been pretty much using brutality, excessive force, excessive force. Essentially, we want to start a paper trail as well. I mean, just like the George Floyd guy, it come to find out he like 17 write-ups. You know what I mean? And now I think that's excessive. He probably should have been terminated. But when you start a paper trail, and also, you start putting, these officers on blast and holding them accountable, I think we can move a lot more, faster and more smarter in that aspect. A lot of these agencies also have a lot of money set aside. So when they do wrong and we hold them accountable, it definitely is a big payday. You know what I mean? So again, I always just try to give, inform people the proper steps of going about how to handle situations and how to follow up, when you do file a report.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. From the other three speakers, then, as you guys go through, we would love to hear just a bit about when you first heard the talk. When did you first have to give it to your children? What has your experience been in that regard? So let's go on to Mr. Lumpkin, if you would be willing to share. And then we'll just go around to Mr. Brown and Mr. Hall, if you guys want to go just right after.
Sure, not a problem. Again, thank you for having me. As far as the talk is concerned, I also have children as well. I have a 20-year-old son who, matter of fact, is currently enrolled in college. And I know for him, especially since we live in a predominantly white area, that I've always wanted him to be careful. So now I do understand Brother Hunt's warning in regards to complying, and certainly that's been something that I've echoed to him. I've also just made sure that he's conscious of when he's going out, who is going to be in the car with him. Really just kind of avoid certain things that might put him at risk for anything additional. Like I said, just to tell him, unfortunately, as African Americans, we don't have a lot of room for margin for error when it comes to certain things, and certainly give the police less to go on in terms of your behavior, demeanor, or whatever you have on you. Which is why, again, I've always warned him, make sure you are mindful of your friends. As far as for myself, I know growing up, I grew up in a very poor area. I grew up in Gary, Indiana. That's where I spent a majority of my childhood. Gary, Indiana has its issues in terms of poverty and gangs. And so, my mother, she was very conscious of making sure that, again, I was very mindful, once again, of who I'm around, making sure that, I'm not doing anything to cause certain attention to myself, and just be mindful of your surroundings, and just, make sure that, you comply. I think that talk really occurred at a very early age. As a 7-8-year-old, you really don't understand. It's just something that your mom tells you, and certainly you don't have the experience necessary to kind of absorb that. But certainly, as I had matured and gotten older and had some experiences of my own, some of them being negative, you really just kind of, things start to click. And when you're in a certain situation where you feel uneasy about the encounter, and I know myself, as well as quite a few African Americans, feel even when the police are tailing, you feel as though that there's a special light thrown on you, and it's very uncomfortable. So as far as the talk is concerned, I mean, you're always constantly having the talk, reminding, at least for me, from my son, that I'm always constantly on him about making sure that he continues to follow that advice, that he continues to make sure that he's doing what he's supposed to. And I feel terrible in that he doesn't, I don't feel that he has the freedom or latitude that others do in terms of traveling, in terms of of being out in public, and certainly with COVID, we're not doing too much of that anyway. But even more so, I'm always mindful, especially if it's late. I get very worried. He doesn't do too much of traveling for a long distance at a late hour, and again, mindful of who's in the car with him, where he's going, and always make sure that we're in constant contact. So there's always that fear and apprehension in the back of your mind. So like I said, the talk is not just a talk, it's a constant reminder, especially when you see things on TV, where unfortunately there are some incidents that have been videotaped, and unfortunately, there's some situations where it wound up not necessarily as people have intended. So that's kind of my experience, and that's kind of what I currently live and still live to this day.
Thank you, Mr. Lumpkin. How about you, Mr. Brown?
Well, having 3 sons, one 31, the other 27, and the youngest one 20, I've had to have that talk, as Mr. Lumpkin alluded to. I can't remember how young they were, but it was while they were in elementary school, riding in a car, walking down the street. The talk was pervasive over everything of what they could potentially endure. And when you go back to where I was raised, South Central Los Angeles, I grew up without my father, and no one ever had the talk with me. My friends, we lived the talk, and so we kind of had to talk amongst ourselves. So we knew we were going to get rolled, as we called it, it was the Lenox Sheriff Department. Lenox would roll through the neighborhood because I lived in a Crip neighborhood. So it was just always gangs, always drugs, always shootings. So we lived in that environment, so we were always suspects. Some of my friends were in gangs, but they were still my friends. So it was just a natural thing. You see Lenox, they light us up, you drop to the floor, interlock your hands, you just assume the position. It was no question, because if you didn't comply, you would get the let's just say billy clubs were your friends in a couple of occasions. I just, my mother had always told me that, you have to do the right thing. So I just was one of the ones that would shut up. But I had some friends that, as Brother Hunt talked about, would try to hold court in the streets, and they ended up in some very compromising positions. So having lived that environment and just having to be subjected to everything, always getting pulled over, always being assumed that you were guilty, it wasn't even about the talk. It was just life. But once I came to Arizona State University and started living in Phoenix and working in the community, as very similar to Ed and Mr. Hunt, as I started working with young people with my fraternity, you had to have the talk with them, because those kids had to understand that their actions could possibly be their last action. And it's unfortunate that you have to have that conversation with them, but you do. Every time you're riding in a car, you're looking at it. There was an experience I had where I was driving. I had 2 of my friends in the car who were white. I was in a neighborhood. I was in North Phoenix. It was an affluent neighborhood. And as soon as I drove by, there was a car that was trying to catch speeders. As soon as I saw that the officer saw I was black, I told him, I said, wait, it's about to happen. And they looked at me and they said, well, what do you mean? I said, just hold on a second. And sure enough, he lit me up and he said I had a tail light out, which I didn't, but it was what it was. And so once I had all my license, registration, insurance, he let me go. He said, yeah, you may want to get that fixed. I wasn't going to go to the back and look, because part of the talk is you don't make sudden moves, you don't challenge, you hopefully you just want to live another day. But once we got out of the neighborhood and checked, said, see, I told you I didn't have a tail light out. It's just part of what you live. there's no, it's unfortunate, but you have to eat, you have to drink water, you have to sleep, you got to live and be aware of your surroundings while you're Black. And I do it every day. I live the talk every day.
Yeah, Mr. Brown, just for those who may not be aware, can you explain what it means to be lit?
Oh, I'm sorry. When the police officers shine their lights, they hit the spotlights, and then they put their blue lights or red lights or any combination of the new lights. You get lit up, you're driving and you see the lights. That's called being lit up. And that's the term that law enforcement uses. And, if they're going to turn on the lights and say, light them up. So that's what it is. It's just par for the course.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So Mr. Hall, we're going to hear from you next. And then we wanted to take a moment to go back to Mr. Hunt as well, just to be sure we had that ongoing conversation of getting a little bit more into Mr. Hunt when you may have first heard the talk or your experience with giving that talk to your children as well. So Mr. Hall, if you can please share just your experience with us. You're still on mute.
Thank you.
There you are.
And, the talk is universal. However, what I've learned is it's dependent on your environment and the situation where you come up. So I grew up I was born in New York, but I grew up on a farm with my grandparents in North Carolina in a small town. So coming up as a teenager and as a young man, I really didn't have the talk from anyone because you really didn't have interactions with the police unless you did something wrong for the most part. However, when I was 27, I was working for Elizabeth City State University and got sent to Los Angeles for a conference. And I have family in South LA. At the time, they were living right near Crenshaw High School, and went to visit them for a couple of days. And my cousin, his big homie, who was Junebug, 6'6", 350 pounds, we decided to walk to the store. And when we came out the store, there were about 4 or 5 of LA's finest, weapons drawn, and we fit the description. Well, I'm from North Carolina, I'm in college, and I'm telling them, you're violating this right, you're violating that right. I know my constitutional rights. And the next thing I know, my cousins are elbowing me and punching me. And they're like, shut your mouth. And one of the cops comes over and he says, boy, rights or no rights, you can disappear. You better shut up. And at that point in time, it hit me. And from there on, that's when I was cognizant of the talk and cognizant of what can happen in your interactions with the police, especially in our urban cities and neighborhoods. So living on the East Coast, living in North Carolina and Virginia primarily, and Atlanta, Georgia, once got married and raising my daughter and 2 young men as well that were like sons. Yes, I always had the talk, and yes, the talk was about how to conduct themselves, but the talk was also about how to hold the police accountable right then and there. I've been hit many times as a parent and as a father with, the whole comply and be respectful. And while I do preach that to my children, I also remind them that Philander Castile and others were compliant and respectful, and they still died. So I'm a big proponent of, with my kids, with myself, when it comes to the talk, we have it, but my kids know if there's any interactions with the police, they're to immediately, respectfully invoke their 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights. And we go from there. Again, people are going to do what they want to do. If they want to be respectful of their positions, they're never going to let you live. If they don't, then it's going to go sideways. I don't want that for myself or my kids. However, at the same time, they know that the talks we've had over life is about being respectful, but being accountable, and most importantly, knowing your rights. And that's where it gets a little sticky in my household, because my wife wants to see the kids come home, which I do, but I want them to be able to stand for something as well. So that's where the talk gets a little tricky for me and for my household, and as well for me personally.
Thank you so much. We know it's a very challenging conversation, and there's so many different perspectives that go into play with this. Mr. Hunt, we really appreciate your unique perspective as both a Black man and as an officer of the law. So we wanted to come back to you after you've shared that unique perspective as a police officer, to see if you also have had that experience with receiving the talk, or having to give the talk to your children, and what that looked like for you.
Yeah, so again, one of the reasons why I joined law enforcement as well, and wanted to become an officer, is because it was always negative encounters when I came in contact with law enforcement. Of course, I grew up on the West Side, so poverty-stricken neighborhood. So I was like, you know what? It's strange that you rarely see officers come, and have positive interactions. So I wanted to be that officer that could provide that. And again, it was young. It was probably about 8 years old. I would come and see, officers just talk, reckless to our people, coming to neighborhoods. Of course, they're going to be there a lot due to the fact that I lived in a neighborhood where it was just a lot of violence and gangs. I mean, to be 100% honest. I also remember I was 14 years old, coming out of the mall one day, and we had shotguns to our head. We had, different, type of pistols, assault rifles, and we fit the description of some guys that I guess, they got in some trouble over in that area. The sad thing was there was no explaining to us like, hey, you know what? We made a mistake. We thought you guys were somebody else. There was no, hey, here's our number. If you guys got any complaints of what happened, none of that, and I felt that was, that kind of hit home with me as well. It was just kind of like careless, like, okay, yeah, we did what we did. Oh, well, you know what I mean? And even now, man, it's sad thing. The only thing, you run our plates. Say, for instance, I'm an officer, and I run a plate. 9 times out of 10, it'll come back if I'm an officer or not, which is sad and which I don't agree with as well. But I get profiled a lot still, which is sad. And a lot of times I pull up beside them and I just give them the stare like, what's up, and it's unfortunate and it happens still, you know what I mean? Sadly. They also made years ago, and I'm just giving you guys a little perspective. I know our department, I'm a good friend with a retired captain, and he said he would get pulled over probably about 4 times a month when he lived in a certain area. And it got to the point where they ended up coming out with a policy stating that you have to identify yourself as an officer once you get pulled over. And that didn't make no sense to me. And you go figure, you guys put in perspective why they would want to do that. I know it's an officer that works for another agency out here. He actually collected $4.2 million because they, pretty much profiled him and got it wrong. So, again, if you think about that policy, that's very, very strange that you have to identify yourself as an officer. Even now, though, at times, I really don't. I kind of sit back, kind of see, let it take course, see what's going to happen if I do get pulled over. But yeah, a lot of times, those are some of the things that we face as well. Even as an officer, you know what I mean? Again, with my son, it started years ago. He understands, me. He knows what I stand for. So it's not pretty hard for him to understand and know, what I'm fighting for. And it's been extremely difficult at these times when you do have family that question you like, okay, well, if you're a Black officer and, you just let the other officers do what they do. It's not possible. I can't tell you one time that somebody's been treated, inhumane in my presence. You know what I mean? One, they know who I am. They know what I stand for. So that shows a lot as well. But it's a continued fight and a continued struggle. You know what I mean? As a minority officer as well. You know, a lot of area commands, a lot of police stations you go to. You go in the break room, guess what's going to be on? Fox News. So that just tells you the temperature right there. In what we deal with, and a lot of steps we still have to overcome. They just put a policy out saying that there's not going to be any race, religion, or politics, but they have ways, you know, subliminally to put, you know, to talk about it in you know, and to hide it. So again, it's just an ongoing battle.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for your perspectives on all of this. I think it's going to be really interesting when we get into the Q&A and see what questions folks might have for each of you, or just about this topic in general. Up next, we are going to move into a conversation with Black mothers about the talk and their unique perspective in engaging in this conversation. We will hear from Ms. Kiana Dickinson. Ms. Dickinson currently serves as the political director for the Arizona Democratic Party. She is the immediate past chair of the Arizona African American Caucus and has worked in Arizona politics for 8 years, supporting candidates, engaging community, and building coalitions. Welcome, Ms. Dickinson. We will also hear from Dr. Monica Lumpkin. Dr. Monica Lumpkin graduated from Wellesley College in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and graduated from Tufts School of Medicine. She is a family practice physician and medical director in the Valley. She has 2 sons and 1 daughter. She is married and loves to travel and cook, and her goal is to take a year off to travel the world. Welcome, Dr. Lumpkin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And then we will also hear from Ms. Bernadine Lewis. Reverend Dr. Bernadine Lewis was raised in the Geechee Gullah culture of Sapelo Island, Georgia, and is a graduate of Bennett College and a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Ms. Lewis holds an MBA from Marist College and is currently serving as Director of Undergraduate Programs in the Franke College of Business at Northern Arizona University. She was a very successful jewelry retailer with collections from artisans all over the world and has a deep interest in anything Black culture related. Welcome, Ms. Lewis. So let's begin our conversation with Ms. Dickinson. Ms. Dickinson, if you would like to share what your experience has been.
Well, thank you all so much for having me. First and foremost, I am a mother. I'm a mother of 3 children, 3 teenagers, 15, 16, and 19. I have 2 young boys and a daughter. My oldest has a car now. He is driving, he is working, he is living his best life and figuring out who he is and what he wants to be in the community. My youngest son is 15, who is still in high school, still figuring it out, but they have also been raised with an activist as a mother. So I am the one that says you will stand up for yourself. You will fight for what is right. You will vote. We just had that conversation today. That's not an option in my house. But I also need you to come home. And I understand where my activism and my motherhood, that intersection for me. I understand that at the end of the day, I need my kids in this house. But I also understand that I fully 100% support them if they wanted to go march on a street, and that they should be able to do whatever it is that they want to do in the name of honoring themselves and being respectful to themselves and demanding that level of respect for themselves. So I know I have a little bit of a different perspective when it comes to that, because they've seen me protest. They have been to protests with me. They have seen me canvass neighborhoods. They have, I've taken them with me to work with candidates and on campaigns, so they understand the significance of it, but they also understand that they need to come home. I live in a small rural community in central Arizona, the city of Maricopa. We our bedroom community. Most of the city leaves out of here to go to work in Phoenix every day and then comes back at night. But I have made sure that through NAACP, being a member and sitting on the executive board for that in our county, making sure that they are aware of who is in leadership in our city, making sure that they are aware of who the police chief is. When my oldest son started driving, I let him know, my son is on these streets and I'm holding you responsible for him coming home. And we have that conversation on a regular basis. Now, we are blessed with a police chief who has a very unique understanding of what's going on and stays with his finger in the community, his ear in the community, and having conversations with us. Not everybody has that benefit. We're a small town, 60 plus something thousand residents here. But if you are in a bigger city, like the city of Phoenix or the city of Tucson or Los Angeles or San Francisco or New York City, how can you do those things? And I understand that is a challenge for all of us. And I understand that as a woman teaching a Black male how to come home is a challenge in and of itself. I understand that. But they know that there's two things. We don't start fights, but we will finish them. So you come home first, and then we are going to do, as Brother Hunt said, we are going to have all the paper that there is in the world to make sure that justice is sought for my children. And they know I am more than willing to go protest whatever needs to be done, especially for my own, especially.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Dr. Lumpkin, we would love to hear your perspective as well.
On the talk. Well, growing up, I didn't have the talk specifically with my parents. It was more, there was just an integration of how, just being Black in America. So it's like everything that you do is built around, what it's like to be Black in America from very different perspectives. So I think I understood the potential hazards out there for myself. I think there is also the sense that I grew up with that, being a Black female, you weren't as at risk when stopped by the police. I know that that's not true, but I felt afraid for my brother, and for other Black youth that I knew. With my children, I have 3 children. I have 2 sons and a daughter. My oldest son is 26, my daughter is 24, and my youngest son is 21. And when they're mixed, so their father could not have that kind of conversation with them because he would not have that understanding. One of the things that I was always very afraid of is that my kids kind of grew up with a lot of that feeling of privilege. And when we're in our immediate family, that's okay, but the world is not going to necessarily respect that. So that's always been a fear of mine. And I would try and have some of these conversations, kind of like the conversations I had growing up, and how potential hazards that are out there, driving, going to the store, shopping, hanging around with the wrong crowd, all of those things that I was taught about growing up. And honestly, my kids didn't really want to hear that because they didn't have that understanding. And I remember one time I dropped my son off at he was probably 7, at his grandmother's house. And being a boy, he liked to climb over the wall into their backyard to go to their house. And when I saw him do that, I remember my heart stopped and I thought, you do not understand what it is that you're doing. And sure enough, I found out, I found out years later that someone did call the police on him. And when they opened up the door, of course, there he is sitting with his white grandparents, and that was the end of that. But I have that has been an issue for me, trying to teach them growing up that they're not going to be treated the same as their white counterparts, and they cannot afford to kind of experiment and make the same mistakes that their peers might make. I think actually as adults, they've somehow grown to have an understanding of that. I know that I talked to my sons recently. My oldest son had in fact even gotten a camera for his car. Had that neither of them really go out at night. They don't, and of course nobody's really going anywhere right now because of COVID. But they understand the potential dangers out there. So I think there is a conversation that is happening among their peers that they're tuned into. I'm grateful that they have that greater understanding now, that they're not, that they're just as risk as, anybody else, any other African American child to be pulled over and to be abused by the system. To be honest, there's so many things, being a mother, but being a mother of, African American children, there's so many things that I'm afraid of, all the time. And I spend a lot of time praying for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Miss Lewis, if you can share your experience with hearing the talk, with having to give the talk, what that has looked like for you in your life as well. You're on mute right now.
Sorry about that. Coming from the South and from Georgia, which is known as the Dirty, the conversation, the talk began, and I'm the mother of now a 34-year-old Black male, conceived and born and raised in Georgia, between Atlanta and Savannah and Sapelo Island. I can recall on Sapelo, kids start driving. You start driving at 8 and 9 years old. So he started driving. And so he was anxious to, turn 15 to get the, learner's permit, and then 16 to get the driver's license. And so at 12 or 13, I can remember beginning to prepare him, having that talk about what it's like to drive the Georgia highways with, I think we all have seen at some point or another in a movie or a commercial, the Georgia or a state trooper or police officer with the reflective glasses and holding the nightstick, keeping the hand on the nightstick. And it looks like theater, but in Georgia, that's very real. And so by the time he was 13, we really did sit down, my father and I, along with my son, to tell him what the process should be when you're driving. And if you happen to be stopped, first of all, my father told him, keep your license, and the car registration, and the insurance as close to you as possible. So while we most may keep it in the glove compartment, most Southern men keep it on the dashboard or on side of the door, on the car seat if you do not have a front passenger. That was to prevent him from having to go into the glove compartment and be perhaps confused as reaching for a weapon. Once he was stopped, we told him, you slowly stop the car, preferably under a night light or a street light. And once the officer proceeds to the car, slowly roll your window down and place both of your hands outside of the car door. um, just to keep your hands very visible and to be very still. And so rather than at 13 having that talk about girls and butterfly feelings in the stomach and what young men go through, this was the first talk with a Black son, a Black native son of Georgia. Very emotional because once he started driving, there were many nights where he would come home and share uh, those stories of being stopped and having to use those techniques that help save your life if you're driving while Black.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm curious, as we're engaging in this conversation and preparing to get into the Q&A, you know, it's a very emotional subject. It's one that I think is a struggle for Black women in similar but also different ways than it is for Black men to have to engage in this conversation. And I'm curious about just that struggle of figuring out, you know, how do I have this conversation? What do I need to say, or what might be, you know, how do I engage in this conversation with my children and prepare them for this? And I'm curious to hear if you can share a little bit about what that was like in terms of figuring out, like, how am I going to engage in this conversation?
Well, for me, my parents never shied away from conversations about race as I was growing up. It started for me very early in life, you know, 5, 6 years old, that I was made aware of that I am an African American little girl. As a young African American girl, the tendency for us as women to be over sexualized very young is real and there. So that awareness was given to me at a very young age, but also the awareness of what was going on in the world. At a very young age, I was aware of Black people running for office for the very first time, or individuals in our community, or crime in our community. I was never sheltered from those things. We didn't necessarily live in the middle of them, but I was always aware of them because knowledge was my safety net. Because if I wasn't anything else, I was smart. And being smart is the one thing that might be able to keep you out of trouble. So I never shied away from my children understanding their ethnicity, understanding that they were young Black boys and young Black girls, how they are perceived, and to know that that is a lie, that they are perceived as beautiful young princes and a princess, and that they have every opportunity, because I will make sure of it. And that there will be those that try to prevent and try to stop those opportunities, but they know that their safe space is here with their mother, and they know, again, I don't shy away from that fight, especially when it's me and mine. So I did start that very early. I started with the medium that they were used to, which is television, right? We watch a lot of documentaries. They've watched the entire Vanguard series on the Black Panther. They have watched everything Martin Luther King related. They have read, Malcolm X book. Matter of fact, my oldest is getting a Malcolm X tattoo. That's a whole nother conversation. There is many. They are fully aware, and I started very early. And I've had friends that have asked me, that question, like, how early did you start teaching your kids about what it means to be Black? And I said immediately, because that's what I think is going to save their life, is if they understand exactly who they are and how they are perceived in the world, and the understanding that that perception is, one, none of their business, but it is something that they need to be aware of, just so that they know that it is a lie. My children have been stopped, not themselves, but they have been in the car with family members and stopped. And young Black boys are viewed as adults way before their age. My sons are tall, I'm tall, they're tall. They have facial hair and beards, and my 19-year-old doesn't necessarily look like a 19-year-old. He probably looks to someone else who isn't familiar like he's 25 or 26, but he's not. And it was imperative on me to let them know as soon as possible that this is what the world looks like. This is what it is, and I have never shied away from it. I've showed them pictures of people being lynched because they need to know what that is. I've showed them pictures of oppression and what that looks like because they need to see it to make sure that they can fight against it, but also know that it's there. So I have made sure that they have had those conversations, that we have those conversations. This summer has been particularly difficult for all of us in the world. But I knew that it was probably going to be okay for my children and how they processed it, because the way they were able to talk about it. They had a vehicle, they knew that it was there, and it wasn't the surprise factor that I think so many young people are experiencing. They were not surprised that it was happening, which is saddening, but at the same time, it kept them emotionally and mentally safe for the moment.
Yeah, Ms. Lewis.
I'm with you on everything, sister, that you just spoke to. I think the element, and I think Brother Warren will bring an interesting, another perspective to this. I think what I'm hearing and what I've witnessed is that the experiences of Black people on the West Coast and the East Coast are very similar. And those in the middle, after we leave the South and move over a little, after we get past Texas, it's a little different. Because I agree, my son grew up in the house where Dr. King frequented. But to still have to add, to your Black is beautiful, but your Black is also hated. And we live in a place where that hate is probably the strongest that you see, personified or manifested. So yes, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Dr. King, Rosa Parks, all of that. Harriet Tubman, being the great grandson of Belali, the father of Black Muslims here in America. None of that could save him or has saved him even as an adult now. So I think there's a different light there that, we tell our children, who you are and from where you come, and this rich history that we as Black women, Black men have here in America. But to ride the streets and the highways where, you can be shot and killed, arrested, given a false arrest just simply because of the color of your skin, it really adds a totally different and a very difficult element. It's very difficult. Mr. Lumpkin, do you have anything to add or share or bring into this?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I just wanted to say that, I agree with everything that I've heard. I think keeping the lines of communication open is very important. I've been fortunate that we're very close to my mother's side of the family, and I have over 50 cousins, and they have lots of aunts and uncles. So they've been around all of them, and that's contributed a lot to their understanding of their heritage and who they are and what they can be very proud of. And I'm very grateful for that. So I think that just having that family bond has been important. You brought up about literature. My kids are readers. Our house is full of all kinds of books. Now, one of the things, and I remember sitting my kids down to watch Roots, and I've got books on the slave narratives, but I want them to also understand that their history is bigger than that. It's so much bigger than that. We had my daughter and husband and I had the privilege of being able to go over to Africa a few years ago during Maya's formative years, and that had such a profound effect on who she saw herself as a person and an individual. And I wish I had been able to bring my sons as well to have that experience, because they get to see that, our lives are different outside of this country. This is not all there is. And this is not the standard for the way that, you're going to be treated as a Black person, as an African person of color in this world. Of course, that depends on where you go, but it's an everyday. We talk about every time we're together. There's some conversation that we're having that's related to our experiences as being African American in this country, and it's not something that's always intentional. You're affected every day, honestly, of your life by being an African American in this country. So it's just part of conversations that we have.
Well, thank you all. I think there's so much for us to, think about and digest with what your experiences have been, and what the experience of the gentlemen who have shared is as well. We're going to launch back into our Q&A period, and spend some time just talking through some of the common questions that come up with this subject, and what some of the experiences have been that you've gone through in navigating, figuring out how to have this conversation, what it's going to look like, and all of those different things. So the first question that I have is, and I'm really curious, particularly for Mr. Hall and Ms. Dickinson, to answer this question because of the unique experiences that you shared. Or I'm sorry, Mr. Hunt, if he's still with us. But it's in regards to walking the line in between with this subject. Being a parent and wanting the best for your child, and being an officer of the law or someone who's engaged in politics, who balances that respect for the law with the complications of just being Black in America, and in a system that is so often, it seems, stacked against you, wanting to encourage your child in activism, but also wanting, again, that statement of wanting to ensure that they come home. So I think the question really is, how do you strike that balance between wanting those things for your child and wanting them to just aware and prepared for these sorts of things?
So again, I'm very, very honest with my son. Also with our youth group that we sponsor and we mentor. Again, just knowing, they have apps now where, again, if you're not comfortable when you get pulled over, you can pretty much, if you're not comfortable when you pulled over, it'll record for you. They have apps on phones now that has those capabilities. And just, again, letting them know, you got to let them know, like, hey, if they know that a lot more majority of times, or not often, depending on your state and in your policies from your states, that a lot of times when we come into contact with adolescents and youth, we have to contact their parents. So just that alone, saying, hey, you know what, I don't feel comfortable, I would like to call my parent. They have to afford you that right, and that's major, And a lot of times, once officers know, okay, these kids are sharp, they kind of know what's going on, ain't going to be no shenanigans. So again, the more we know, the better we are. I also recommend that we get involved with our local agencies. We got to have that relationship. I tell, my frat brothers here. So first Tuesdays, every area command, every police station, you can go in and just speak to your officers that patrol your neighborhood, you know what I mean? And have those conversations with them. Let them know that you're here. Let them know that, hey, we're here and we want to be heard, and we let y'all know we're holding y'all accountable. And that's the reality of it. But again, once, officers in situations know that, okay, they kind of know what's going on. They know what they're supposed to do. And they don't have to be in a demeaning tone. They don't have to be in a mad tone. Just let them know, hey, I'm confident. Hey, I know my rights. I'm not being disrespectful. You know what I mean? That goes a long way. Even with me and my son, I tell him respect. That's my job, is to handle any issues, not yours. Any issues you have with officers, that's my job. You just respect, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, and you make sure you get home, and I'm going to handle the rest. You know what I mean? And again, once we equip our kids and our family with these things, I think we'll be better off. Now, again, I'm 100%. I always keep 100%. Brothers who know me and people who know me, I'm raw. But I'll tell you this, a lot of times we be wrong as a people, and we don't want to talk about that. And I'll say this, even with my experience, it's not your everyday folk that, working professionals. I'm not having issues with people who I'm talking to. Essentially is what I'm saying. It's the issue with a lot of young kids or a lot of younger adults who just disrespectful. I'm going to be 100%. It's tough out here. Even now on the strip, when we pull people over, we get the F12 and, let them go. I'm like, this dude probably shot 3 people. You don't even know what happened. And you sitting here telling us, let them go. And just the disrespect. We didn't have bottles thrown at us. And again, I'm going to keep it 100%. It ain't our Caucasian counterparts. It's us. You know what I mean? And again, I think we as a people, or as more professional, mature folks, we need to educate our youth. And I think that's the missing link. So that's why I pretty much make it an issue to be a mentor in my organization to these young adults, because they need it, because a lot of them are lost. Again, 50 guns that we got, 54 guns in this past month, all of them young adults. You know what I mean? So that's the reality of it. And we never want to talk about that, but we have to talk about that, guys, because again, as a people and some of our young people, we out there reckless, 100%. You know what I mean? And I ain't gonna lie, a lot of times I'm looking around like, okay, I gotta be careful, I gotta be safe, because that's just the temperature right now. Now, in the aspect of rioting and looting, of course, Fox projects something else, but no, that's pretty much the Caucasian race that's out here doing the most. But again, it's equipping our youth, equipping our folk, and letting them know what they can and what they can't do, to be calm, to be respectful. And again, we need to start hitting them in their pockets. When we start hitting them in their pockets, I guarantee you all of this is going to change.
So I will just echo everything Brother Hunt just said and add one little piece to that. When we educate our young people, not just on what's happening right now, we need to educate them on what are the statutes, what is the actual law? What's the rule book? What's the playbook that other people are playing with? We are at a disadvantage because we are, let me just be truthful, listening to Pookie. We can't listen to Pookie. We need to listen to let's go to the statutes. Let's find out what the law is. The only way that other people are able to access things that we can't access is because they know how to find the recipe for it. They know the ingredients for it. They know how to get to it. They know the law. We already know the law was not made for us. It was made to control us. So let's find out how they are trying to control us and use it against them. If we know the rules, they can't cheat. But we have to know the rules. And that is what is going to be to the detriment of us, no matter the age. And I know we tend to be very hard on young people and we put the onus on young people, but I know a lot of people in their 40s and in their 50s have gone a very long time not understanding the rules in which they need to play by. Because if you know the rules, it absolves you of a whole lot of shenanigans that you have to deal with because you stop things right up front. Because once they know that you know the rules, they know that you're on a different playing field. And that doesn't take a college degree to know the rules. It just takes going to pick up the book. I encourage everyone to get with your local law enforcement and understand the rules. That way, we have a conversation out here in our NAACP in Pinal County, where we have a conversation called Let's Have That Talk. And it's a conversation with our police chief, and that's where he has told us the rules. This is what a stop looks like. This is what is going to happen. And if it doesn't happen this way, you call me and you let me know. So now we are equipped with that information. Now, true enough, that might only work where I live. That might not work in the city of Phoenix. But if we're having those conversations everywhere, if all youth and all older individuals are having conversations like that, we have an opportunity to even the playing field. Are we all going to make it completely even? No. Because like someone said earlier, the color of our skin is considered aggressive to other people just because we exist in Black skin. We can't even everything, but we can at least know the rules. And once they know, you know, what is the saying that we've all heard is that most people are afraid of an educated person of color. Well, we need to be those educated people of color. That's how we learn to fight.
I think another important thing for us to talk about as we engage in this conversation about the talk and this particular talk that Black families have with their children or are engaged in as young Black people is where we're coming from in having this conversation. So often I think it gets categorized as anger or hatred of the police or hatred of the system or any of those sorts of emotions. And I think that's something that we have an opportunity to dispel a little bit right now. So I'm curious to know where each of you is coming from when engaging in these conversations. What's the emotions that are behind it? What is the concern, or what leads you to feel that this is a conversation that's necessary?
I could, you know, I've been having actually this conversation with people, mostly online though, again, in part because of COVID. I think that the pandemic has influenced the way that we're able to talk to people. And when you're doing all of your engagement on social media or online or even over the phone, there's a lot of opportunity for misunderstandings and for the conversation does not flow very well. People can't read your facial expressions. They can't ask questions. They can't actually delve more into the issues because I have you know, the church that I go to is very, it's a lot of, there are a lot of different nationalities that belong to that church. And I've had these online, quote unquote, conversations with people, and it's been kind of frustrating. And I really wish that we could just sit down and talk, because I don't think that people understand. I don't understand where they're coming from, what their concerns are, and they're not understanding what my concerns are. You know, I've heard people say that, you know, well, they don't like the Black Lives Movement because it's, what do they call it? Like it's, they're saying that it's I guess a left-wing radical group. And I'm just trying to say, okay, forget about the group itself. Let's talk about, what does it mean when we say Black Lives Matter? What are you hearing that's so upsetting to you? And to have those conversations. And it's, you know, what I end up doing happens, you know, some of the times is I just, you know, start unfriending people or stop talking to people. And I don't think that that's going to help in the long run, because we do have to have these conversations. You do have to understand what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter, or when we defund the police. I think, I don't know what that noise is. When we say defund the police, we're not saying that there should be no police, but we're saying, what I hear is to stop militarizing the police and using them as instruments against its own citizenry. And so I just, you know, I think that there are a lot of these conversations that we need to have with people in person that we're not able to have. Maybe we, you know, maybe church groups or other groups have meetings like this, forums like this, where people come and are able to talk. Because I think this is even better than doing it on social media.
I'd like to comment on that. I'm pretty sure many of us have seen the meme where it says, if we say all lives matter, people are okay. If we say blue lives matter, people are okay. But as soon as we say Black lives matter, the only problem that people having with the lives matter is when we use the word Black. And I think that's the new talk. The new talk is, why do we have to say Black Lives Matter? And it's really not for us. It's for everybody else, that they have to understand, how is it that we are in 2020 and we have to actually say that Black Lives Matter? And let's not convolute and let's not water down our message. We're trying to educate people that it has been apparently clear to us that in the bigger scheme of things, Black lives are not mattering as much as other lives. And that's the truth. There's no terrorist group, there's no faction. It's just people bringing attention to the fact that Black lives actually matter. And why am I doing this? I have a small time while I'm on this earth, but I have an obligation to help the masses. People, Black people, and other folks, but especially Black people, have died and sacrificed every single thing so that we could have this opportunity that we are engaging in now. I would be remiss to not respect that. And my organization, that's what we believe in. A lot of the D9 organizations, very similar capacities. And I challenge them all. It's like, you got your degree, you got your house, excuse my language, but damn it, what are you doing in the community? When's the last time you was out there? It's up to us to re-engage and to help the masses. And if some of us have been blessed with more things, it's our moral obligation to do more. To whom much is given, much is required.
Okay. I'd just like to chime in on that. And I agree with, you know, what the panel is saying, how, and especially what Ms. Dickinson shared. I believe, you know, when I'm speaking to groups, youth, people in general, I believe that it has to start with proper education, because so many of us are educated but not properly, and it doesn't take a degree for that, you know. And it all goes back when I talk to my daughter and other people, you know, you have to know the law. You know, there's a difference between a code the statute and the law. And, you know, understand, taking the time to educate ourselves properly and is part of the fight that we have to do. And then most importantly, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've shown people the actual law and they'll tell me I'm lying, I'm making things up, or that can't be true. Just to share a personal story of myself, I haven't had a driver's license in over 23 years. I learned that one wasn't needed. I learned how to defend it. I learned how to explain it, and haven't had the need for one since. Even in my engagements with the police, there have been some that have been okay, and there have been some that just want to be straight out, you know, jerks about the situation, and I've had to seek recourse against them and been successful. So everything starts with properly educating yourself, and not like Brother Hunt said, you know, doing everything with respect. And if we can have a respectful education, then we can have a respectful conversation and implement some change.
You know, one thing I wanted to just kind of add that I'm just seeing is there's such a proliferation of misinformation that is out there that's just out and out lies and I'm not sure I even understand why people are believing these. I don't know why it's so much easier to believe all the lies and the negative propaganda than it is to believe what you're clearly seeing evidence with your own eyes. So I think that's where I've been struggling a lot, is to understand, because I don't think that it's just solely my job to educate people. People need to be seeking out the truth, and they need to actually be engaged in their own education. And that's something that I found to be very frustrating, is I think people see this as just a Black issue only. And while it is a Black issue that affects us, it is an American issue, and it should affect every human being. This is an issue that affects you if you're white or Hispanic or Asian, or if you're an American. This is your issue too.
Yeah. Mr. Hall and Miss Lewis, this next question is going to be aimed towards you, though anybody can speak to it if you have a thought on this. But Mr. Hall, you raised an interesting distinction between your life when you were on the East Coast and then going out to California to visit cousins and family, and the difference in engagement that you had there, where you were used to being able to question and declare your rights, and your cousins on the West Coast were telling you, don't do that. Ms. Lewis, you shared a similar distinction between life in the South and elsewhere. And one commonality that seems to exist despite location is that sense of that need to be prepared for both the question of what happens if I'm confronted with this, or what do I do when I'm confronted with this. Do you think there is a differentiation in what the talk looks like based on where you are, or even where you're from? Is there something that makes the talk experiential versus universal in its delivery, or in its presentation, or in being prepared for it?
Miss Brother Hall, you want to go first? Go ahead, please.
You know, for me personally, growing up in a small town in North Carolina, it was yeah, you had the whole, you know, black white thing. You had, you know, the railroad tracks which separated, you know, the neighborhoods and so forth. However, I had no reason to go across the other side of the tracks, so I really had no engagement with the police. You know, yeah, for me, it was that. Now, once I got out of that little bubble, that little country town, and ventured off to major cities, then my experiences went into a whole nother realm. So for me, growing up in that small town in North Carolina for high school and early part of college, yeah, I couldn't even, I used to laugh at my cousins when they would say, you know, they were harassed by the cops, or when NWA came out, I thought it was all made up, and they're like, no, this is real life. And so it depends on where you were, you know, where you grew up. North Carolina was sheltered. Couldn't even begin to compare with South Central. So for me, until I experienced it firsthand, it was just a fairy tale. It was something on TV.
That's interesting. I grew up traveling up and down I-95, and that's the major highway. Will take you straight from Florida up, straight up the coast. And you know, maybe it is growing up Black in the South. To this day, you know, when I talk to, I have a very special friend in South Carolina, and you know, the protocol still is, and we talk about it often, you do not go anywhere, you do not travel without letting someone know where you're going. Call them when you get there. Call them when you make a stop. And you know, so I noticed being out here, life is different. You know, I don't have to be accountable. So maybe it is, Sister House, where you're from, depending on where you're being Black at the time. But I know that every time that I drive back across country, I'm making calls. I'm in Houston now. Be here overnight. I'm at such and such a hotel. You know, as soon as I cross the line, and as I get closer to Arkansas and Tennessee and Alabama, I'm letting people know where I am. I'm a product of the civil rights. That's what we did. And someone always had some money. You always had that one phone call that you can call in case you need some bail. And you know, when I make that trip back on the East Coast, that's still the protocol. So maybe it does depend on where you are being Black here in the United States of America.
The next question is one that is for everyone on the panel. And I'll tell you from my education background, if no one unmutes themselves to answer it first, I will just call on someone after a moment. But the question is really, it's often the question comes up as to whether or not the talk is doing a service to young Black people. You know, in conversations that I've had people say that they wondered if the conversations I had with my own parents, or if the conversations I'm aware of that others have had, is not just creating an undue sense of fear, if it's not inspiring noncompliance or anything along those lines. And I'm curious to hear about your thoughts on that line when it comes to this conversation. Is that what the talk does, or what is really behind the conversation? And Mr. Lumpkin, I saw your hand.
I definitely want to answer that. I guess for me, until things change, you know, the talk still stays the same. You know, I heard the quote by someone, things aren't getting worse, they're getting filmed. And until we see that there's some movement in certainly some of the things that we encounter. I mean, you look at the situation for Breonna Taylor, how long that's going on. I mean, that's pretty cut and dry what happened. However, you know, it's taking 180 days plus and we still have no movement. Tamir Rice, who's playing on the playground with a toy gun, and the police officer shoots the young boy, doesn't even get out the car. And yet, we have a young Caucasian male with AR-15 rifle to travel from Illinois to Wisconsin, shoots protesters who, again, are protesting. That's what our Constitution allows in this country. And yet, he's allowed to go back home, go to bed, and of course he turns himself in. Or you have African Americans in a church in South Carolina who are worshiping to their God peacefully, and the young Caucasian male goes into the church, shoots several people, and he's taken to Burger King. Don't know if he had the tour or not, but I mean, aside from that, he was able to be treated more than humanely. And again, until these things change, unfortunately, we still have to have the talk. Now, it might come in, there's some maybe some subtleties that might be different. However, the bottom line is you do whatever it is you need to do to ensure that your loved one comes home. And again, we still are having these same talks even after all these years. I think those that know me, especially my sister, she knows that I'm all about equality, fairness, and to educate. And until we all can get on the same plane and have conversations where we actually understand each other and understand, at least try to understand our experiences, then I don't think that talk really goes away.
I'd like to respond from a West Coast perspective. In quoting the great Western philosopher Ice Cube, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. So when it comes to the talk, I'd rather have my information to my head be fed versus my body pumped full of lead. So it's along those same lines. I am going to always exercise on the here and now. As Ed pointed out, it is still going on. So I can't let my guard down until things changes. Okay. But until then, it's business as usual.
Yeah, I'll definitely speak on that aspect. Again, it's definitely important. I put in perspective to my son is that I'm giving him armor for the war. You know what I mean? And I'm raw with my son. He's 12. I have honest conversations. I hold nothing back. And again, he even knows if I was to go down, or die in the line of duty, he knows what he's supposed to do. So. It's just, I think it's the reality of just having, that real conversation with them. But to be honest with you guys, from my perspective, and being in law enforcement for 14 years, instead of having forums where we have people that look like us, we need to get some of these Caucasian people on these panels, and we need to have them real conversations with them. My department did one thing that I was proud of probably in the last 2 weeks, and I've never seen done. They put black and white officers together, and they said, let's talk. You know what I mean? Let's talk, because this needs to be said. Everybody needs to get a perspective. And what I came up with, and I already knew it, is they don't care because it don't affect their culture, it don't affect their people. They really don't care. So we really have to think about it again. That's another reason why we have to prepare our people, because they don't care. It don't affect them. That's the reality of it. I've heard Black Lives Matter was a radical group from coworkers. I've heard the worst of the worst. And again, I tell them, I said, well, it's strange because it seems like there's more Caucasians out there looting and out there protesting than anybody. So I'm confused. You know what I mean? But again, when I speak, it's usually crickets. We've had our president of our union put out a letter to the Vegas Knights saying that well, we don't support you guys. You guys are anti-police, just because they're taking a stand for equality and justice. So again, I'm me and another person who's the president of our Black Police Association. We're the only ones out of all the Black officers we have. We don't have many, but we have a few. We were the only ones that stood up to them at a meeting and said, well, you don't speak for us, because we don't think that. We think what they did, by standing for equality and justice is right, and we support them. So again, you can't speak for us. So next time, how about have a meeting, make sure the body knows, and maybe we vote on it before you put out a letter in regards of your own personal opinion and speaking for all officers, because we all don't feel that way. So again, they do not care. That's just my personal opinion. There's nothing on the department. But again, knowing, 14 years of my experience, they do not care. So we have to have these conversations and ask them, like, why don't you care? You know what I mean? And I'm sure we'll get the sentiments of, okay, well, honestly, it don't affect us. Even as the Black Police Association, we've been heard that we're a radical group, and you have to break it down. I'm like, look, I grew up when we only had one channel to watch that the people identify as was Black Entertainment Television, BET. So imagine growing up in that aspect when you only had one channel, and you wonder why we need a Black police association. You wonder why we need a Black Entertainment Television. You wonder why we need the NWCP. You wonder why we need Black fraternities and so forth, because we didn't have the same opportunities and luxuries that you guys have. And a lot of them, you know what they said at the end of the meeting? I've never looked at it like that. You know what? I didn't even think about that. Yes. But again, the word Black, it intimidates so many people. You know what I mean? To us, it's beautiful, but to our counterparts, oh, it's the worst thing ever. You know what I mean? You can have Asian pride. You can have Hawaiian pride. You can even have Irish pride. But when you start talking about Black pride, oh, this is crazy. That they're a radical group. You know what I mean? But when you get the KKKs, all they do is practice hate. We've known for the past of X amount of years, they lynch people, they hurt and kill people. But again, we're the radical group. We're the ones that promote violence. It's just ignorance. We have a lot of people in our counterparts that's just ignorant. So we definitely need to hold them accountable and have panels so we can educate them.
Can I chime in
Absolutely.
on that, please? Back in, I think it was March of 1861, Vice President Stevens, who was the Vice President of the Confederate, stood in Savannah, Georgia, and I can go show you the spot, and gave a speech mainly to the new police officers that was in favor of why slavery needed to be kept in place. And the entire speech, and I'm really wishing that we can do a broadcast on the Cornerstone speech, because this is the speech that was given in the South to all police officers. Keep slavery intact, and it argued that white supremacy was the foundation of everything, of every principle here in these United States. And so I know, for at least in the South, that this was a practice for a very long time, that police officers were introduced to this speech as a part of their becoming police officers. And I'm not exactly sure if anything much has changed. And this is what we battle with. This is what we are up against. And this is the fight. This is why we have to have the speech. And I'm looking at a comment from one of our viewers. The speech also includes, and I'm reading this, I believe her name is Sister Renia. The speech also includes how you need to go out of your house dressed. And I remember having that because my son wanted to wear the white t-shirt and the hoodies, and I'm like, that will get you killed. And so that's also a part of the talk. And so if we're asking today if the talk is still relevant, yes, I think we're still adding more to the talk. There are more things now that we need to be aware of, and I'm hearing, parents back in the South are talking about keeping the phone charged and being ready if you need to record incidents. So here it is, a new something new added to the talk on how to protect yourself when you're Black out in these streets and while driving.
I just like to chime in, and the talk is going to be the talk, and as Miss Lewis added, with different layers added as we go on until some changes occur, and quite frankly, the type of changes that have to occur would be so radical that they would almost destroy the framework of what people recognize as this country. Several people have mentioned that the speech given, in the 1800s and the slave codes, the institution of policing. I, I don't know. I have to talk with my kids and people, and quite honestly, how can something that's built upon a foundation of hatred, oppression, violence, and enslavement ever be balanced and fair against the very people it was designed to oppress? So, I mean, if we're going to be honest amongst ourselves in the community, we have to first look at the whole system of policing, because anything tied to the roots of slavery, it's never going to benefit Black people. Never. So, yes, we'll always have the talk. It's just going to be a matter of when are we going to take the talk and turn it into substantial action.
If I could just add one comment, is that we are seeing this largely now. We are seeing it, across the globe, actually, people who are protesting, who are concerned, who are angry. But we are also, we have been concerned and angry our entire lives. This is a hashtag for some. It is our life for us. This is a moment for certain people, but it is our entire existence. So I don't think the talk is going anywhere. I think it will outdate all of us, and I hope all of our children will actually continue on with the talk, because it's going to be necessary, to everyone's point, that this is not going away. Slavery and the remnants of slavery will be here for centuries to come. It's uncomfortable for others. It's a lifetime for us.
I think that, yes, that leads
Boom.
into a question that we received from our audience, which is, what is needed from local, state, and national leadership to move forward in bringing these stories to light? I think to expand that question, it's what's needed from local, state, national leadership in engagement with the Black community and in engagement with the broader community to bring these realities to light that we've shared today.
Well, I'll start with that one, guys. I think we're definitely up against a fight. As you guys, I don't know if you guys noticed that President Trump pretty much said that he's going to ban diversity training, and I guess like anybody who supports white privilege, that thinks that white privilege. So that tells you right there what we're up against. You know what I mean? So again, our counterparts, they feed off of that. And again, that's just more fuel to their fire to be reckless and do what they want, in my personal opinion. You know what I mean? So again, we have to start, I think, again, with our leadership in our communities. I think Brother Warren hit it on the head, Brother Hall, one of the brothers hit it on the head, saying that we have to get engaged. We have to get in the game. You know what I mean? And if we don't do that, you know what I mean? Our kids are going to go through the same thing again. It's us now. It's about our kids. It's about the future. So we have to take the steps to try to get it right, even with voting. This probably, this election is probably one of the most important. I know we usually tend to say that, but as we can see, it's critical out here, man. Super critical. So we got to do what we got to do, whether we out there, helping with the polling, whether we're making phone calls, walking door, we have to do our part, because we're at a time where, if 45 gets back in office again, I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up voting, because I was doing some research and I found something that was pretty profound. The last 20 years, African Americans have voted in each election had increased. 2016 was the only time during that period where it actually declined. And African American males voted 3 million, had 3 million less votes than African American women. I've heard, different conversations about, the Biden and also Kamala Harris, as far as, some people might not like them. Well, do you understand that, presidents are responsible for appointments of judges. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I don't think she's going to last 4 years. So far, President Trump has, and these are lifetime appointments, appointed over 200 judges. You're talking about circuit judges and people that are critical for laws and interpreting laws, that, now these people are basically in the chair for life. And some of these people don't even appear to be qualified. You look at how the economy is. I mean, he inherited a pretty robust economy from President Obama, and now look at us now. He hasn't taken the COVID situation. Initially said it was a cold. And here we are, several months later, still huddled up in our house. Children getting sick. Matter of fact, we have my sister and I. We just came back from visiting our father in the Chicago area who contracted COVID. So you're right. There's a lot of things that are important with this election, but you're also right about the attitude that he perpetuates, in terms of it is not one of collaboration. It's not one of love. It's one of divisiveness, and it's one that is really tearing at the fabric of what Dr. King and others, and brother John Lewis, who's Phi Beta Sigma, by the way, have tried to instill in our country. And we definitely need to make sure that we show up and vote, because there were some states that were lost with basically several thousand votes short. And again, as I mentioned, there were decline in number of voters, particularly among African American men. So I hope that doesn't repeat itself in this election. I know my son will vote.
The beautiful thing about this conversation is it allows people from different backgrounds, socioeconomic, religious, and so forth. So I always, in many conversations, I have to tell people, don't let the light skin fool you. I'm not that complacent house Negro. And I say that jokingly, but I say that at the same time, where I have to disagree with Brother Lumpkin and many on this panel, and speak for many people of color and many citizens in general, but especially of color. Both parties have been around for hundreds of years, and neither one of them care about Black people, because Black people aren't even citizens in this country. So to continually have to say, oh, go vote for Kamala and Biden because they're Democrats. Democrats don't care about Black people. Republicans don't care about Black people. When are we going to have a conversation like Malcolm X, the ballot or the bullet, and take the steps that will really, truly impact change? Because if we want to have change into this country, we have to take the United States government to court. We have to sue them for human rights violations like the Rwandans did, like the Argentinians did, and they were successful. Keep playing this game, Republican, Democrat, they don't care about black folk. And if anyone disagrees with me, please look up any laws over the last 100 years that have truly benefited any people of color. Because 4 years ago, before Trump, Obama was in White House, he didn't pass any laws that benefit people of color. Passed gay and lesbian laws, but none for people of color. Go back before Bush, they didn't do anything, go back. So I hear this and respect this. However, many people, we're tired of that. And if there's ever gonna be change, we have to, one, get our citizenship, because people of color, you have no rights if you're not a citizen. In the 13th and 14th Amendment, nowhere does it say black people, nowhere. But the laws that sat there and said black people are only 3/4 citizens say black explicitly. So I don't want to be that radical person. I apologize. However, know people that there are many people out there like me of color who are tired of the shenanigans and feel like either one, left or right, it's like the pill. You know, do you want to take cyanide or do you want to take gasoline? I'm not taking either one.
Don't apologize for speaking your truth, Mr. Hall. I think this is a great conversation because we're getting, as you said, multiple sides and multiple perspectives on this. We are a bit over time, so we're going to wrap up momentarily. I did want to encourage folks to continue engaging in the conversations that we're having within the Flagstaff and Arizona community of Black people, where we are educating and continuing to engage in these conversations that we hope are not exclusively speaking to the experience of Flagstaff and Arizona, but are speaking to a broader conversation, although our focus is the more local community. The next Live Black Experience conversation that we'll be having is on Wednesday, September 16th at 6 p.m., and we'll focus on Lincoln and the economics of slavery. We will also be beginning a new series through a coalition of Black community leaders that will be hosting a set of 6 town halls. Mr. Warren Brown will be helping to facilitate those, and they will focus on a number of topics that are, we believe, of essential importance to the Black community of Flagstaff in engaging the broader Flagstaff community. We'll be starting with a conversation on social and criminal justice on September 17th at 5:30 p.m. The second session will be on representation and preservation on Saturday, September 19th at 4:30 p.m. So we encourage all of those who are part of our community and our extended community, including all of our panelists today, to join in for those town halls, participate, share your insights and your experiences that will help to shape what we hope to develop as a policy plan to present to the city of Flagstaff to keep this conversation going and move us forward as a community. I'd like to invite now, if anyone has any final thoughts that they would like to share as we prepare to close out, please.
I just wanted to say, you know, we the brothers here at Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated in Phoenix and in partnering with the city of Flagstaff, we're so appreciative of the opportunity to be involved in these conversations because, one, it helps strengthen the ties of not only service, but of information and of connection, because we're all in this together. You know, as the title says, it's the Black, you know, lived experience, and this is something that is important. We have to have the foundational conversations in our community before we can spread them out, like Brother Hunt has said, and like Dr. Lumpkin expressed. So thank you again for the opportunity. We look forward to further engagement and spearing not only conversation, but action in our community. So on behalf of the brothers of the Alpha Epsilon Sigma chapter of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, thank you so very much for allowing us to participate in this much needed discussion and dialogue.
Sister Kara, I'm sorry. Sister Kara,
You were right the first time, Kara.
Kara, thank you. Sorry. Can I bring us to a close, please?
Absolutely.
We have a viewer that commented about the Good Shepherd, the story that we find in the Holy Scriptures, about Yeshua, who, the shepherd leads a flock of sheep, and one sheep gets lost, and that shepherd goes back to get that one sheep that was found to be in danger and in harm's way. And so this viewer is likening that story, that parable, to the Black Lives Matter movement, and is in fact saying that that is what Black Lives Matter is all about. Yes, we all are at risk as people walking in the skin that we're in. And indeed, I think we can walk away today saying, yes, the talk is a really deep conversation that will continue to have to happen. I'm putting it out there that we as a people, if you do not know, that we really go back and look at the history of policing, that it was in fact police officers were created to be slave catchers. And then we have that cornerstone speech coming up in 1861. So at some point, we have to go back to the very beginning and have this discussion about policing and where we are now. And that is truly the only way that we can perhaps eradicate having the talk, or just changing it into a different type of conversation. Until then, we have to watch our backs. We do this project to educate, to inform, and to enlighten, mostly for our European or European American brothers and sisters. And this is our space to come to the table and have this conversation, and many are very hard conversations. With that being said, we want you and we invite you to continue to come back and to be a part of this community dialogue. Until we meet again, stay prayed up, stay Black, stay strong. To our European American viewers, we thank you for your support. Continue to educate yourself and become more comfortable with having these conversations that are much needed. Until we meet again, thank you, and we'll see you again next week.